Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Under the intense heat and pressure of time, as the concrete begins to harden minute by minute, and even a small delay could ruin all their effort, Toan and Tu Diem are forced to push through and finish everything in one go. And in that exact moment of pressure, a new direction for their life quietly begins to take shape. So what made them decide to change their path after such a demanding day? Now let's explore the story of Toan and Tu Diem together. If you enjoy it, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. At midday in the summer, the sun hit hard, light pouring straight down and making dry dust rise in waves around a tall pile of materials. Toan stood there with a shovel, his back soaked with sweat, breathing heavier under the heat. His steady voice cut through the constant sound of metal hitting tools. "There is still plenty of sand here. Add more to this spot. It will save cement. This should be enough." Tu Diem stood close beside him, hands moving continuously, mixing at a steady pace. Their eyes stayed focused on the mixture, but there was clear concern when looking at the gravel pile getting smaller. The air felt heavy, not just from heat, but from pressure. Because once concrete is mixed, it cannot wait. Even a few minutes can change the texture. Toan glanced over and gave a small, reassuring smile. "If it is not enough later, we can add more. It is fine." Tu Diem nodded, voice short and clear. "Okay." No more words were needed. They continued working, each movement of the shovel and each turn of the mix already familiar. The coordination happened naturally without discussion. Toan looked again at the materials, quickly deciding to go buy more cement to avoid any risk. He set the shovel down, wiped sweat from his forehead, and walked out of the small work area with steady steps, even though his body was already tired. Tu Diem stayed behind, facing the thickening mixture alone, keeping the same rhythm without stopping. The only focus was to keep the mixture stable and prevent it from drying before Toan returned. The sun burned like fire, heat rising from the ground made the air even harder to breathe, but inside there was a clear sense of certainty. As long as they worked together, this would be finished. The sound of Toan's motorbike faded slowly down the dirt road until it disappeared, leaving behind a long stretch of quiet, broken only by the sound of the shovel and the hot wind passing through. The sun kept pouring down over the yard without easing, and the concrete that had been mixed began to set slowly. The surface started to dry, and thin waves of heat rose from the ground. Tu Diem leaned closer to check, still mixing steadily, but now feeling the pressure of time more clearly. After a while, the familiar sound of a motorbike came back, growing louder as it approached. Toan returned with a heavy cement bag on his shoulder. His shoulders dropped slightly under the weight, and his voice sounded rough from thirst and fatigue. "I'm back." Tu Diem stepped forward immediately, helping to take the load, then received a slice of watermelon that Toan had brought. The piece was cold and bright red, and even holding it already felt like relief from the heat. They quickly cut it open, large pieces separating, juice running down their hands before reaching their tongues. The sweetness and coolness eased the body for a short moment, but the work did not allow a long break. Toan placed the cement bag down, opened it, and continued mixing faster to make up for the lost time. Tu Diem stepped aside to clear the way for the cart, but kept holding the shovel, eyes fixed on the mixture that was slowly getting thicker. Toan spoke quickly, "Move back a little so I can pass through." The heavy wheels rolled across the ground, making rough sounds as dust rose again with each movement. Sweat ran down Toan's chin, but his pace did not slow. Then he realized he had forgotten his gloves. Before he could say anything, Tu Diem had already gone inside, brought them out, and placed them in his hands. "Here for you." No explanation, No extra words, just a simple action done at the right moment. Toan nodded slightly and continued working. They returned to a continuous rhythm again, pouring, mixing, adding water, checking the texture. Sweat flowed more heavily now, clothes fully soaked, arms starting to ache. But neither of them stopped. Toan looked over, voice slower. "Are you tired?" Tu Diem shook their head, but their eyes, red from sun and dust, showed the real condition. Time moved quickly, the concrete became heavier, harder to turn, and the thought of possible rain stayed in their minds. They agreed to take a short break, eat more watermelon to regain strength, then finish the gate in one continuous effort. The decision was clear and direct. Even in exhaustion, both understood that finishing today would reduce a lot of work later. A light afternoon breeze began to appear, not strong, but enough to make the air feel easier compared to the intense midday heat. Toan and Tu Diem sat down beside the part of the concrete that was slowly setting, each holding a slice of watermelon, juice dripping onto the dry ground and forming small dark spots. Toan took a large bite, chewed slowly, then said, "It is cooler now. It will be easier to continue." Tu Diem nodded, wiping sweat from their forehead, their expression less tense than before. They slowed down while eating, not rushing, giving their bodies time to recover. The space around them became quieter, with only the steady sound of cicadas in the distance. After a few minutes, Toan continued, "We worked a lot today. No need to cook tonight. Let's go to a small roadside drink stall, have something light to eat and drink." Tu Diem stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded, a clear sense of relief appearing. The idea of real rest, without worrying about more work at home, made everything feel lighter. Toan took out his phone and called, "Thu, tonight we are going to the drink stall. Come with Tu Phan. Let's sit and talk for a while." His voice was clear and direct, no unnecessary words. The call ended quickly, and Toan gave a small smile, as if the evening plan was already set. They continued eating watermelon, talking about simple things like how sweet it was and how to choose a good one by looking at the skin and listening to the sound when tapping it. Small conversations, but enough to ease the mood. A simple decision created a clear shift, from exhaustion to waiting for a moment of rest. The work was still there, but the pressure had reduced. The afternoon sunlight weakened, no longer as harsh, and long shadows stretched across the still wet concrete gate. Toan stood up, picked up the hoe, and began leveling the surface carefully, each movement steady and controlled. "Give me the hoe, I will handle this part faster." Tu Diem continued pushing a few more loads, their hands shaking slightly from fatigue, but still careful when pouring and spreading. Sweat ran down and mixed with the thin layer of cement dust, sticking to their skin and hair. The work was almost done, only a small part left. The pressure dropped noticeably, replaced by relief and quiet confidence. Toan looked over, 3 more loads and we are done. Go take a shower first. Tu Diem shook their head, wanting to stay until the end, but Toan spoke firmly. "Your face is all red. No need to push more. Go shower." There was no argument. Tu Diem went inside, prepared clothes and water, then started to shower. Toan stayed behind, finishing the last part. His movements were slower now, but still precise. His arms felt heavy, his back tight, but as the gate took shape, a clear sense of satisfaction appeared. The sound of water running from inside carried a cool feeling into the air. When Tu Diem came out, hair still wet and wearing clean clothes, Toan had just finished the final part. The sweat on his body had dried, his face still showed fatigue, but his expression was lighter. They cleaned together, washed tools, and put everything back in order. The space became quiet, filled with the smell of fresh cement and damp soil. The long day of work had ended, the gate was now complete, and what stood out most was how well they had worked together. Night fully settled, and the warm yellow light from inside the house spread out into the yard, lighting the area they had just finished. Toan stepped out after his shower, hair still wet, wearing clean clothes. Tu Diem stood near the door, holding a small bag, their eyes carrying a mix of shyness and comfort. "You are done. Go comb your hair. I will get ready quickly." Toan nodded, running his hand through his hair, then asked, "Have you changed?" "Not yet. I will do it now." They finished preparing quickly. Toan put on his shoes, checked the door, turned off the lights, and handed a hat to Tu Diem. The moon had risen high, its white light spreading across the dirt road in front of the house. Toan looked up and said, "Later we sit at that table, eat something light, talk, and watch the moon." Tu Diem smiled slightly and nodded. They walked side by side, not speaking much, but their steps were steady and unhurried. The night air was much cooler, and the clean feeling after a shower made their bodies more comfortable. The sound of cicadas was still there, but no longer carried any sense of heat or pressure. It became just a familiar background sound. When they arrived at the small roadside drink stall, the lights were bright but soft, and gentle music was playing. Toan pulled out a chair for Tu Diem, ordered 2 iced lemon teas first, then looked toward the entrance, waiting for Thu and Tu Phan. The atmosphere had clearly changed, from physical exhaustion to quiet relaxation. Toan looked at Tu Diem and held one clear thought. Today was heavy, but if you feel comfortable, then everything was worth it. The drink stall was more crowded than earlier, but still calm. Warm yellow lights hung low over the old wooden tables, creating a steady and comfortable atmosphere. The wall fan turned slowly and pushed out light air that helped your body cool down after a long day under the sun. You could hear ice hitting the sides of glasses and quiet conversations around you. Everything felt controlled, nothing rushed, very different from the pressure of the afternoon heat. The pace here slowed down in a way that made it easier to sit, breathe, and think clearly. The sound of a motorbike stopping came from outside, then Thu and Tu Phan walked in. They looked around briefly before moving toward the table. Toan stood up right away and pulled out chairs. "Sit down, we already ordered drinks." His voice was steady and natural. Tu Diem stayed seated, both hands holding the glass of iced lemon tea. Cold water condensed on the outside and ran down onto the fingers, creating a clear, cooling sensation that helped the body relax little by little. Thu sat down and looked at them. "I can tell you worked all day just by looking." Tu Phan leaned slightly closer. "Your face is still red. The sun must have been strong." Tu Diem nodded without saying much, but the expression was softer now, no longer tense like before. Only a light fatigue remained after finishing an important part of the day. Toan ordered a few simple dishes, nothing heavy, just enough to restore energy. When the food arrived, steam rose from the bowls and a light, spicy smell spread into the air. Everyone started eating slowly, not rushing. After a few bites, you could clearly see the body responding. The tiredness reduced step by step. Toan began to talk about the work, speaking in a steady and clear way. Today, the concrete mix followed a ratio of 1 cement, 3 sand, 4 gravel. Keeping that ratio makes the structure strong. If it shifts even a little, the surface can crack later. The first 2 hours of continuous work already reduced energy significantly. Thu nodded. Many people ignore that part and just estimate. It looks fine at first, but degrades after a few months. Tu Phan asked another detail. "Did you keep the surface moist during the heat?" Tu Diem answered directly, yes. Lightly adding water every 15 minutes on the finished sections to prevent surface drying, the answer was short, but technically correct and easy to apply. The atmosphere became more relaxed after a few minutes of eating. Toan took a sip of water and paused briefly before continuing. Recently, you have been thinking more about the current work. Construction still brings income, but the time is unstable. You have to travel often, stay away from home, and cannot control your daily schedule. If this continues, it becomes difficult to maintain a stable life. The statement was not emotional, but very clear. The table stayed quiet for a few seconds. Thu looked at Toan and nodded, because the situation was easy to understand. Tu Phan did not respond immediately and instead observed Tu Diem. Toan continued, "You want to move to something simpler, something closer to home, something you can do every day without leaving. It does not need to be large at the beginning, but it must be stable and sustainable." Tu Diem remained seated, still holding the glass, fingers tightened slightly. No words were spoken, but the emotion was clear. This was not unexpected. It was something already considered before. Thu spoke directly, "If you want to change, I can guide you. Right now I am doing small trading. Every day I go to get goods early in the morning between 5 and 7. Fruits like watermelon, mango, bananas. Then everything is sold within the same day." Thu explained more clearly, "If you buy watermelon at around 6,000 per kilogram and sell at 8 to 9,000, selling 80 to 100 kilograms per day gives a clear margin, but everything must be sold within the same day. You cannot keep it overnight because the quality drops. This is the basic rule you must follow if you want to continue long-term." Toan listened carefully without interrupting. Tu Diem also focused on every detail. Tu Phan added, "For farming you should start small. For example, 2 or 3 rows. Choose easy crops like water spinach or mustard greens. Harvest time is about 20 to 25 days. Seed cost is low and maintenance is simple. Water in the early morning or late afternoon. Never water at midday to avoid plant stress. Once you get used to it, then increase the area gradually. Do not grow too many types at the same time because it becomes difficult to manage. This approach reduces risk and keeps your workflow stable in the beginning." Toan nodded repeatedly. "In that case, you can start this week, go with Thu for a few sessions to learn how to get supplies, then continue independently." Thu agreed. It only takes 2 or 3 trips to understand the process. The key is to stay consistent and not stop halfway. The conversation moved deeper into practical details. Thu explained how to choose fruit, check skin color, examine the stem, tap to hear the sound, avoid damaged or overripe items. Tu Phan explained soil care, keep moisture consistent instead of letting it dry out, and then watering heavily. Because that damages the roots, all of these details were practical and could be applied immediately without adjustment. Tu Diem sat quietly beside them, speaking little but listening closely. The earlier fatigue was no longer visible, replaced by clarity. Everything being said could be used directly without guessing. Toan looked at Tu Diem and then at Thu and Tu Phan and said simply, "Thanks to both of you, you now have a clear direction." The sentence was simple but complete. Nothing more was needed. The stall slowly became less crowded. A few tables stood up and left. The conversations became quieter. The glasses were nearly empty with only melting ice remaining. Thu added, "Next week I will take you to a stable supplier. The prices are consistent and fair. After a few visits, you will get used to it." Tu Phan added, "For the land you can start tomorrow or the day after. Begin with light work to get used to the pace. No need to expand immediately. At this point, everything had moved beyond ideas and turned into a plan that could be executed. Toan nodded. Then tomorrow you start planning in more detail. No need to delay. Tu Diem looked over and nodded slightly. Both already understood the next steps without needing to say more. All four stood up. Toan paid quickly. No unnecessary delay. The goodbyes were short and clear. Each person got on their motorbike. Engines started. Headlights stretched across the dark road ahead. The surrounding space had become quieter. Only the fading sound of engines remained as each person left. Toan and Tu Diem rode back together along the familiar road. The night air was cool and steady, completely removing the remaining heat from the day. No conversation was needed, but you could clearly understand one thing. Today was not just a normal working day, it was the starting point of a new direction. Clearer, more practical, and something that could be maintained for a long time if the same method and consistency were kept.
Sau một ngày làm việc dưới nắng gay gắt, Toàn và Từ Diễn cùng nhau hoàn thành phần cống bê tông trong điều kiện gấp gáp. Khi hỗn hợp bắt đầu đông cứng, dù mệt, họ vẫn phối hợp nhịp nhàng, nghỉ ngắn để lấy sức rồi tiếp tục làm đến khi xong. Buổi tối, cả hai ra quán nước gặp Thư và Tự Phan. Từ đó, câu chuyện chuyển sang hướng mới khi Toàn chia sẻ mong muốn thay đổi cuộc công việc để ổn định và ở gần nhà hơn. Thư gợi ý buôn bán nhỏ, còn Từ Phan đề xuất làm đất quy mô nhỏ để bắt đầu. Những kinh nghiệm thực tế được chia sẻ rõ ràng, giúp họ nhìn thấy hướng đi cụ thể. Kết thúc buổi gặp, một kế hoạch mới dần hình thành, mở ra bước chuyển quan trọng trong cuộc sống của họ.